Thomas Hale lived alone on a small ranch in the quiet desert of Arizona. Every morning for years, he followed almost the same routine. He woke before the sun, fed his animals, checked the fences, and walked the land that had once belonged to his father. But even though the place was wide and beautiful, it carried a heavy silence. Thomas had lost his family long ago, and with them, he felt he had lost a part of himself. Most days, the only sound he heard was the wind brushing across the sand or the soft steps of his old horse walking in its pen. One morning, just as the sky turned pink, Thomas stepped outside with a cup of warm coffee in his hand. He planned to check the water tank near the far edge of his land, something he had done hundreds of times. But before he walked far, he froze. Right there in the soft dirt not far from his front porch was a footprint. It was deep, large, and unlike anything he had seen. Not the print of a boot, not of a horse, not of any animal he knew. It was human, but it was nearly twice the size of any human foot he had ever seen. He stared for a long moment, then crouched down to touch the print. The edges were fresh. Something or someone had been there only hours earlier. Thomas felt a strange mix of curiosity and caution. He wasn't a man who grew frightened easily, but he was also not someone who ignored things that did not make sense. He set down his coffee and slowly followed the prints. They led away from the house, across the dry field, and toward the open desert. As he walked, the footprints remained clear, each one spaced far apart, as if whoever made them had taken long, heavy steps. Thomas kept walking, following the trail until he reached a cluster of old storage sheds behind the ranch, a place he rarely visited. That was when he heard it, a soft sound, almost like a breath mixed with a quiet cry. Thomas listened carefully. The sound came again, a little louder this time, a small whimper, like someone trying not to be heard. He approached the nearest shed, his steps slow and thoughtful. He pushed the door open, and at first, the darkness made it difficult to see. Then he blinked, and his eyes adjusted. Someone was there. A girl, though not like any girl he had ever seen, sat curled up in the corner. She was huge, almost twice the height of an ordinary human, with long legs folded awkwardly and shoulders hunched as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Her hair was dark and thick, falling over her face, and he could tell she was injured. Her leg was scraped, and her arms looked bruised, though not in a violent way, more like she had fallen or traveled a long, hard distance. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Thomas was stunned, but he tried to keep his expression calm. The girl, on the other hand, looked frightened. Her large eyes watched him like he might chase her away. Thomas finally spoke in a slow, gentle voice. "I don't mean you any harm." The girl flinched slightly, as if she expected something else. Her breath shook, and she tried to lean farther into the corner, even though the shed was too small for her to hide properly. Thomas raised his hand slightly to show he was not a threat. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She nodded a little, then winced as she moved her leg. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Yes, I'm hurt." Her words surprised him. He expected fear, but the tone she used carried something deeper: exhaustion, sadness, and a fragile hope that maybe this stranger would not push her away. "What's your name?" he asked gently. For a moment she hesitated, then replied, "Nayeli." It was a beautiful name, and Thomas repeated it quietly, so she knew he wasn't mocking her. "Nayeli," he said with a nod. "I'm Thomas." She blinked, studying his face, trying to understand whether she could trust him. Thomas saw again the fear in her eyes, and it reminded him of a wounded animal he had once helped years ago, a horse trapped in a canyon. Fear made even strong creatures feel small. Nayeli looked like that now, even though she was physically larger than anyone he had ever seen. "You can stay here if you need to," he said, "but you look hungry, and you need water." She hesitated again, but her dry lips and tired expression told him she hadn't eaten properly in days. "I won't force you," Thomas added. "I'll bring food. You can decide if you want it." He stepped back slowly, giving her space. When he left the shed, Thomas walked straight to his kitchen. He made a sandwich, simple bread, cheese, and vegetables, and filled a large jug of water. He also wrapped a clean towel and a small medical kit, just in case. As he headed back, he wondered who she was. Why was she so big? Why was she wandering in the desert? And why had she chosen his ranch, of all places, to hide? He reached the shed again and found Nayeli watching the doorway with wide, uncertain eyes. When she saw the food in his hands, her expression softened just a little. "I brought this for you," he said, and set the items near her but not too close, making sure she didn't feel cornered. She slowly reached out and took the water first. Her hands were large, but her touch was gentle. She lifted the jug and drank carefully, as if afraid she might spill it. After she drank, she whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was clearer now, still soft but no longer trembling. She ate the sandwich slowly, savoring each bite. Thomas noticed how thin she looked despite her size, like she hadn't eaten properly for many days. When she finished, Thomas took a quiet breath and asked, "Can you tell me what happened?" Nayeli looked down at her hands. "I was traveling. Far from home. I got lost. People saw me. They got scared. I ran. And I kept running." She touched her leg gently. "I fell yesterday. It hurts to walk now." Her explanation was simple but enough. He understood that her size had frightened strangers, even though she meant no harm. "Your leg needs cleaning," Thomas said carefully. "But only if you want me to help." Nayeli swallowed and whispered, I'm scared." "I know," Thomas said softly. "But I won't do anything that hurts you. And if something does hurt, you can tell me to stop." Trock. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign that he might lie. But Thomas had a calm, honest expression, something she must have recognized because, after a moment, she nodded slightly. "You can look at it," she said quietly. Thomas moved slowly, respecting her space. He kneeled down near her leg and opened the medical kit. When he lightly touched her skin to see where the scrape began, she gasped a little and whispered, "It hurts. Please don't do that." Thomas immediately pulled his hand back. "Okay," he said gently. "I won't touch it. Not until you say it's okay." Nayeli took a slow breath, calming herself. After a moment, she nodded again. "You can try. Just be gentle." He cleaned the wound carefully, using soft dabs instead of rubbing. Nayeli watched him closely, but she didn't pull away again. When he finished, he wrapped her leg with a clean cloth. "That should help," he said. Nayeli looked at the bandage, then at him. "Thank you," she whispered again. Her eyes softened, and the fear in them eased just a little. For the first time, she looked like she felt safe. Thomas sat back on his heels. "You can rest here. No one comes to this shed. You'll be safe." Nayeli nodded slowly. She leaned her head against the wall, exhaustion settling into her shoulders. Thomas stood and walked toward the door. Before he left, he looked back one more time. Nayeli had already closed her eyes, her breath slow and peaceful. She looked less afraid now, and something inside Thomas warmed at the sight. It had been a long time since he had helped someone, and an even longer time since anyone had needed him. As he stepped outside and closed the shed door softly behind him, he felt the beginning of something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He didn't know who Nayeli truly was, or why fate had led her to his lonely ranch, but he knew one thing clearly. He wouldn't let her face the world alone. Not while she was on his land. Not while she needed someone. And for the first time in a very long time, Thomas Hale felt that his empty ranch might not be so empty anymore. Nayeli slept in the shed for many hours, far longer than she expected. Her body was tired from days of walking, and her mind was tired from fear and confusion. When she finally opened her eyes, the light coming through the small cracks in the wooden walls told her it was late afternoon. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she remembered the rancher, the calm voice, the gentle hands, and the way he stopped the moment she said it hurt. She remembered how different he was from the people she had seen before, people who backed away in fear or stared at her like she was not human. She slowly sat up, her bandaged leg throbbing just a little. The pain wasn't sharp anymore, just a dull reminder of her long journey. She touched the clean cloth wrapped around her leg and felt a strange warmth in her chest, not from the injury, but from the kindness behind it. Not long after, she heard footsteps outside the shed. Her heart jumped a little, but the steps were steady and familiar. The door opened, and Thomas appeared, holding a tray with a bowl of warm soup, a few pieces of bread, and a jug of water. "You're awake," he said, his voice calm as ever. "I thought you might be hungry." Nayeli nodded slowly and offered a small smile. "Thank you." Thomas set the tray down a comfortable distance from her and sat on an old wooden crate. He didn't want her to feel crowded. He didn't ask questions right away. And Nayeli appreciated that. She picked up the bowl and took small sips of the soup, feeling warmth spread inside her. She hadn't felt warm or safe in a long time. For a while, they shared a quiet moment. Only the soft sound of the spoon touching the bowl and the wind outside filled the space. Then Thomas finally spoke. "You said you were far from home," he said gently. "Do you know how far?" Nayeli placed the bowl down and looked at her hands. "I've walked for many days, maybe weeks. I lost track." Her voice broke a little. "I didn't plan to go so far. I just kept moving." "Why?" Thomas asked softly. She took a deep breath before answering. "Because people were frightened of me. Everywhere I went. Even when I tried to speak gently. Even when I tried to help." Thomas nodded slowly, as if he understood the weight of her words. "It must have been hard." "It was," she whispered. "Sometimes I thought, maybe there's no place for someone like me." She looked up with cautious eyes. "When I saw your ranch, I didn't know if you would chase me away too." "I wouldn't," Thomas said without hesitation. Nayeli studied his face again. She could see that he meant it. His expression was steady, honest, free of judgment. She relaxed a little more. Thomas leaned back slightly. "You don't need to worry here. This ranch is quiet. No one comes by unless they're invited." Nayeli nodded, comforted by his words. But fear still lingered beneath her calm expression. Even if Thomas accepted her, the world outside might not. "Your leg is still hurting?" Thomas asked. "A little," she admitted, "but much less now." "That's good," he said. "You should rest for a few more days." Nayeli hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Thomas replied immediately. "Everyone needs help sometimes." His words surprised her. Most people treated her like an inconvenience or a danger. But he made her feel human, like she was worth helping. She blinked back the warmth that rose in her eyes. Thomas noticed her silence and changed the subject lightly. "I've put a blanket in here," he said. She looked down and saw the neatly folded blanket beside her. She touched it with her fingertips. It was soft. Far softer than anything she had used during her travels. "Thank you," she said again. Thomas nodded. "If you need anything, you can call for me. The house isn't far." She looked at him quietly for a moment, then asked, "Why are you helping me?" The question was simple, but heavy. Thomas took a slow breath before answering. "Because you needed help," he said softly. "And because no one deserves to be alone when they're scared." His voice held a truth she couldn't ignore. He didn't help her because he wanted something. He didn't help her because he was curious. He helped because it was the right thing to do. Nayeli lowered her eyes, touched by his answer. After a moment of silence, Thomas stood. "Would you like to come outside for a bit? Just to get some fresh air?" Nayeli hesitated. She didn't want anyone else to see her. But she also missed the open sky. She nodded slowly. "Okay." Thomas stepped out first to give her space. Nayeli carefully crawled out of the shed, trying not to bump the doorway. When she stood up fully, she stretched her long arms and breathed in the warm desert breeze. The afternoon sun painted everything gold, the land, the fence, even her skin. Thomas watched her gently, making sure she didn't lose her balance. "Take it slow." he said. Nayeli nodded and took small steps. Her leg hurt a little, but she felt stronger than before. They walked a few steps away from the shed, stopping near a quiet patch of earth where the wind moved the dust in soft patterns. "This place is peaceful," Nayeli said softly. "I like it that way," Thomas replied. She looked out over the land, taking in the endless horizon. "It feels safe here. That's what home should feel like," Thomas said. Nayeli's eyes lifted at the word home. She hadn't felt at home anywhere for a long time. Not even with her own people, who loved her but didn't understand the pain she carried. Her size had made her stand out, and standing out had made her feel alone. After a few minutes, she grew tired, and Thomas gently guided her back to the shed. She lowered herself down, breathing slowly. "You should rest," he said. Nayeli nodded and leaned back again. "Will you come back later?" "Of course," Thomas said. "I'll check on you again after sunset." She smiled faintly. "I'm glad you found me." Thomas paused at the doorway and answered softly, "I'm glad you came here." When he left, Nayeli lay quietly, thinking about his words. She liked the way he spoke. Not loud, not harsh, not frightened. Just steady, warm, and honest. She found comfort in that. As the evening came, Thomas returned with a lantern. He placed it in the shed, filling the space with a gentle glow. He checked her bandage again, moving carefully, never rushing, and each time she flinched even a little, he paused and waited for her to nod before continuing. She felt safe enough now to trust him completely. As the lantern's light shimmered on the wooden walls, Nayeli began to talk. She told him small pieces of her past, how she used to sit alone outside her tribe's camp because she was taller than everyone else, how children were curious but adults were unsure, how she often wondered if she belonged anywhere. Thomas listened quietly, with respect. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He simply listened. And that alone made her feel lighter. After she finished speaking, Thomas shared a little about himself. He told her about the family he once had, the quiet life he lived, and the loneliness that grew after they were gone. His voice softened as he spoke, and Nayeli could hear the pain beneath his calm tone. "You're lonely too," she said gently. "I suppose I am," he admitted. For the first time, they both understood something important. They had found each other at the exact moment they needed someone. "Maybe," Nayeli said softly. "We don't have to be lonely right now." Thomas looked at her with a small smile. "Maybe not." The night deepened, and the lantern glowed warmly between them. A soft trust settled in the space. Nayeli no longer feared the ranch. She no longer feared Thomas's presence, and Thomas no longer felt the weight of his empty home pressing against his heart. As he stood to leave for the night, he said, "Rest well, Nayeli." She smiled gently. "Good night, Thomas." He closed the door softly behind him, and as Nayeli lay back down, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing clearly. She was no longer running alone. And for the first time in many lonely days and nights, she fell asleep without fear in her heart. "Yes," she answered, "better than I have in a long time." Thomas felt relieved. "Your leg looks better too. Maybe you can take a few steps today." She nodded, then paused, noticing something in his expression. "You seem worried." Thomas hesitated. He didn't want to frighten her, but he also didn't want to hide anything. "I found some tracks near the fence line," he said slowly. "Fresh ones." Nayeli's smile faded. "Tracks? What kind?" "Boot prints," he replied. "More than one." Nayeli's heart dropped. She looked toward the door instinctively, as if expecting someone to walk in. "Maybe it's nothing," she said softly, but she didn't believe her own words. Thomas didn't want to alarm her further, so he changed his tone to something gentler. "It could be someone just passing through. But I want you to be careful today." Nayeli nodded, but her thoughts drifted back to the people who had chased her before, people who didn't understand her size or her quiet nature. She felt a small knot tighten in her chest. Being found again frightened her more than anything else. Thomas noticed the worry in her face and spoke reassuringly. "You're safe here," he said. "No one knows you're on this ranch." Nayeli tried to relax, trusting his words. But deep inside, she felt the familiar fear of being discovered. She sighed quietly, and Thomas gave her a comforting smile. "Let's go outside for a bit," he suggested. "The air might help," she agreed. And with careful steps, she followed him out of the shed. Her legs still ached, but it no longer held her back. She breathed in the warm morning air and looked over the open land. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Thomas said. "I always liked mornings here." They walked slowly toward the large tree near the edge of the ranch. The branches offered a cool shade, and the ground beneath was soft. Nayeli lowered herself carefully, sitting with her legs stretched out in front of her. Thomas sat beside her. For a while, they talked about simple things, how the weather had been the last few days, how animals behaved during the summer, and how peaceful the desert felt early in the morning. Thomas shared stories about the ranch when he was young, and Nayeli smiled as she listened. Then something caught her eye. Far in the distance, beyond the hills, a faint dust cloud rose into the air. It was small, but it moved steadily. Nayeli's heart tightened. She pointed toward it silently. Thomas followed her gaze. He watched the dust rise, watched how it moved, and he felt a quiet concern grow inside him. It wasn't just the wind. Something, or someone, was moving across the desert. "It could be nothing," Thomas said softly, though he wasn't fully convinced. Nayeli looked down. "I don't want to bring trouble here." "You're not bringing trouble," Thomas said firmly. "People wandering the desert isn't unusual. We don't know who they are." Quote. She nodded, though her chest still felt heavy. They stayed outside for a little longer until Nayeli began to tire. Thomas helped her back to the shed and brought her fresh water. As she rested, he walked out toward the ranch entrance to take a look around. The dust cloud had faded, but he still felt uneasy. As the day went on, Thomas worked on normal chores, feeding the animals, fixing a broken gate, checking the water lines, but his eyes were always scanning the horizon. Nayeli, meanwhile, stayed mostly in the shed, using her time to stretch her legs carefully and practice moving without too much pain. In the afternoon, she heard Thomas calling her from outside. His voice wasn't frightened, but it carried a seriousness she didn't hear before. She stepped out slowly. "What is it?" Thomas pointed toward the far fence. "Someone passed by earlier. I saw footprints again. They're heading in the direction of the hills." Thomas pointed toward the far fence. Nayeli felt her chest tighten. "Are they searching?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I think you should stay inside for now." She nodded, though part of her didn't want to hide. She was tired of running, tired of being afraid. But she trusted Thomas, and if he wanted her to stay hidden, she would listen. Later that afternoon, as the sun softened, Thomas decided to check on the north side of the ranch. It was rare for people to walk there. It was rocky and difficult to cross. But today he felt like he should look. Nayeli stood near the shed door, watching him walk away, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and guilt. She wished she didn't bring this worry into his life. She wished she were normal enough to live unnoticed. As she stood quietly, she suddenly heard faint voices drifting from a distance. They were too far to understand, but close enough to recognize as human voices. She froze. She turned her head slowly toward the sound, and her heart began to beat faster. The voices faded after a moment, but the echo of them stayed in her mind. When Thomas returned, she met him with wide, anxious eyes. "I heard people," she said quietly. "Close." Thomas frowned, concern deepening. "Near the ranch?" "Yes." He looked over her shoulder toward the hills. The sun was beginning to lower, and long shadows stretched across the land. He took a slow breath, thinking carefully. "Nayeli," he said finally, "I think we should plan to leave the ranch tomorrow." Her eyes widened. "Leave? Why?" Thomas didn't want to frighten her, but he needed to be honest. "If people are wandering around, and if they see you, I don't know how they'll react. And I don't want you to feel trapped or unsafe." She lowered her gaze. I don't want to cause trouble for you. You're not causing trouble, Thomas said gently. But staying here might not be the safest choice. She swallowed, her throat tight. Where will we go? I know some quiet places, he said. Old trails. Places where nobody goes. We can travel at night when it's cool. I used those paths when I was young. Nayeli looked at him with a mixture of fear and trust. You'll come with me? Of course, Thomas said without hesitation. I won't let you travel alone. Her heart warmed at his words. She had spent so much of her life alone that she forgot what it felt like to have someone stay beside her without expecting something in return. As the sun began to set, they sat together near the shed, planning softly. Thomas explained where they could walk, where the land curved in their favor, and which paths stayed hidden from sight. Nayeli listened carefully, impressed by how well he knew the desert. You really know this land, she said. I've lived here all my life, he replied. It's quiet, but it teaches you things. Nayeli looked out across the wide desert. I never wanted to run again, she said softly. But I guess sometimes running isn't a weakness. Sometimes it's just a way to keep going. Thomas nodded. It's not running, he said gently. It's choosing safety. They watched the sky turn orange, then pink, then deep purple. As night settled, the air grew cool. Thomas brought a lantern and set it near the shed. He gave Nayeli a warm blanket and told her to rest early, because they would leave before dawn. She thanked him quietly and lay down, though sleep didn't come quickly. She listened to the soft sounds of the ranch, distant crickets, the gentle sway of the barn door, the soft hum of the wind. She wondered what tomorrow would bring. She wondered if she'd ever stop looking over her shoulder. But then she thought of Thomas, his steady voice, his calm presence, his gentle hands. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't running alone. Outside, Thomas stayed awake longer than usual, sitting on his porch and watching the desert with careful eyes. He wasn't afraid, but he felt a responsibility he hadn't felt in years. Protecting someone wasn't a burden, it was a purpose. As the stars filled the sky, he whispered to himself, We'll make it, Nayeli. Inside the shed, Nayeli finally drifted into sleep, holding on to one comforting truth. She had a friend. The sky was still dark when Thomas gently tapped on the shed door. A soft glow lay on the horizon, the first hint of dawn still far away. The air was cool and quiet, the kind of silence that only existed before the sun rose. Nayeli slowly opened her eyes and sat up, rubbing the sleep from her face. It's time, Thomas said quietly. Nayeli nodded. She felt nervous, but she also felt ready. She knew staying at the ranch any longer was not safe. Not when strangers were wandering so close. With slow movements, she stood up, stretching her long limbs carefully. Her leg felt stronger now, and she could walk without too much discomfort. Thomas handed her a small cloth bag. There's some food inside. Bread, dried fruit, and water. He had prepared it late last night while she was sleeping. Thank you, she said softly. He smiled gently. We'll move slowly. If your leg hurts, tell me. Together, they stepped outside. The ranch looked different in the early darkness. The familiar shapes of the barn, the fences, and the old windmill faded into shadows. Even the desert around them felt bigger, quieter, almost like it was holding its breath. Nayeli looked around one last time. In just a few days, this place had become something precious, a safe shelter, a quiet home, a space where she felt human. Leaving it made her heart heavy. Thomas noticed the sadness in her eyes. You can come back someday, he said softly. When things are safer. She nodded, though she wasn't sure when that day might come. Still, his words gave her comfort. They began walking toward the back of the ranch, far from the main road. Thomas led her along an old narrow path that curved between low hills. The ground was sandy in some places, firm in others. The sky slowly began to brighten behind them, but the sun had not yet shown itself. Nayeli walked carefully, her long steps gentle and quiet. Thomas walked beside her. Not too far ahead, Not too close, always staying where she could see him. His steady presence made the long walk feel less tiring. After an hour, the sun finally rose, painting the desert in soft gold. The heat had not yet arrived, and the morning breeze cooled their skin. Nayeli stopped for a moment and looked around. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, but it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, in a quiet, peaceful way. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Thomas agreed. "Most people never see it like this." They walked on until they reached a cluster of large rocks. Thomas paused and pointed ahead. "There's a small spring behind those rocks. We should rest there." Nayeli followed, and soon they reached the spring, a tiny pool of fresh water surrounded by smooth stones. It was a hidden place, easy to miss, unless you knew exactly where it was. Nayeli knelt beside the water and cupped her hands to drink. The water felt cool and refreshing. "This place is secret," Thomas explained. "My father showed it to me when I was young. I thought it might help us today." Nayeli smiled at him gratefully. "You always know the right thing to do." Thomas looked down modestly. "I'm just trying to help." They rested under the shade of a tall rock where the sun couldn't reach them. Nayeli stretched her long arms and relaxed for a few minutes. Thomas sat nearby, drinking from his flask and watching the landscape carefully, making sure no one was around. After a while, Nayeli spoke. "Thomas, do you ever feel like the world is too big?" He looked at her curiously. "Sometimes." "Why do you ask?" "Because I always feel like I take too much space," she said quietly. "Like I don't fit anywhere. Even in my own tribe. I felt different. People were kind, but they always looked at me like I was something unusual." Thomas listened carefully. "I didn't want to leave home," she continued. "But the more I grew, the more people whispered. They said I was special. Some said I was a blessing. Others said I was strange. I didn't know what to believe, so I walked away, thinking maybe I could find a place where nobody stared." She looked down at her hands. "But everywhere I went, people stared even more." Thomas nodded slowly. "People fear what they don't understand." Nayeli sighed softly. "I just want to belong somewhere." "You do," Thomas said gently. "Everyone belongs somewhere. And sometimes, that place is with someone who understands you. Not where you expected to be." Nayeli looked at him with warm eyes. She didn't know if she fully believed that yet. But hearing it from him made her feel lighter, as if a part of her heart was finally being understood. They rested a little longer, then continued their journey. Thomas led them along quiet trails behind the hills, away from open roads and far from any houses. They walked slowly, stopping now and then whenever Nayeli felt tired. As the day grew hotter, they found shade beneath tall bushes or large flat rocks. Thomas always made sure she had enough water. He shared stories from his childhood, stories about the ranch, his horse, and the days he spent helping his father fix fences. Nayeli listened closely, enjoying the calmness in his voice. In return, she told him stories from her tribe, stories of the stars, the mountains, and the old songs she used to hear at night. Thomas listened with interest, imagining a world he had never known. Hours passed, and finally the sun began to lower again. The desert glowed orange, and long shadows stretched across the ground. "We should find a place to stay for the night," Thomas said. "Not far now. There's an old cave up ahead. It's small but hidden. We can rest there." Nayeli nodded, trusting him completely. When they reached the cave, it was just as Thomas described, small, but deep enough to hide them from sight. The air inside was cool, and the ground was soft with dry sand. Nayeli carefully sat down, leaning against the wall. Thomas set his small bag on the ground and took out some bread and fruit. They ate quietly, watching the sky darken through the cave entrance. The stars slowly appeared one by one until the entire sky sparkled. Nayeli had always loved the stars. They reminded her of home, of the nights she spent listening to stories around the fire. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think the stars were guiding me. I walked for days, weeks, and somehow I ended up at your ranch." Thomas looked at her thoughtfully. Maybe that wasn't an accident. Nayeli smiled. Maybe not. As the night grew darker, the air turned cold. Thomas placed a blanket beside her. You should sleep, he said kindly. Aren't you sleeping? She asked. Not yet, he replied. I want to keep watch for a bit, just in case. She nodded and lay down on the soft sand. The cave was quiet except for the faint sound of the wind outside. Nayeli closed her eyes. For a long moment, she simply breathed slowly, feeling safe. After a few minutes, she opened her eyes and looked at Thomas. He was sitting near the cave entrance, his back straight and his gaze steady on the horizon. Thomas? She whispered. He turned. Yes? Thank you. For everything. For helping me. For staying with me. For not being afraid. Far. He gave a gentle smile. You don't have to thank me. I'm not afraid of you. Her eyes softened. I know. That's why I trust you. His smile grew warmer. Get some rest. We have a long journey tomorrow. She closed her eyes again. But this time, her heart felt lighter. She wasn't alone in the world anymore. She had someone beside her, someone who didn't see her size as something strange, someone who didn't treat her like a problem, someone who made her feel like she mattered. Outside, the stars shimmered. Thomas listened to the quiet of the desert and felt something he hadn't felt in many years, a peaceful sense of purpose. Helping Nayeli wasn't a burden. It was a path he was meant to walk, and he wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Before long, Nayeli fell asleep, her breathing soft and steady. And Thomas knew, deep in his heart, that he would protect her and help her find the place she had been searching for, a place where she belonged, a place she could call home. The desert night stretched on quietly as two lonely souls rested together. No longer alone. No longer searching in the dark. For the first time in a very long time, both felt the warmth of hope guiding them forward.